Hi, I'm Kathleen Turner, Ledgerwood. I am, just to tell you a little bit about myself, I'm an assistant professor and the writing area coordinator at a small HBCU in Missouri, in the middle of Missouri. And Anne and Eric are the other two presenters. If you all want to introduce yourselves, that would be good.
Sure, I'm Eric Jurgens. I am liberal studies faculty at the College of Menominee Nation, which has a campus. Its main campus is on the Menominee Reservation in Keshena, Wisconsin. We also have a campus in Green Bay, Wisconsin. And of course, I am on occupied Menominee land.
I'm Anne Canavan. I'm an associate professor at Salt Lake Community College in, wait for it, Salt Lake City, Utah. We're a large urban open access campus. We are the only community college, public community college in the state, but we have 10, I believe, campuses across the Salt Lake Valley where about 70% of Utah's population is clustered.
And then we're just going to talk a little bit informally about what each of us has done in our different diverse programs and kind of how that's going with other faculty and what the reaction has been. And then we'll open it up to questions and discussion, assuming that that's where we'll get the most lively bits of our talk here today. So Anne or Eric, do you want to start? Or
Sure, I'll volunteer as tribute. Why not? I'm going to go ahead and just share my screen for a moment. Can you all see it? All right. So so this is just the mission statement of the College of Menominee Nation. This was actually recently revised by our Board of Trustees. So we are ironically a land grant institution, even that, it's like the college is on Menominee land and it was chartered by the Menominee people. It is not a land grab institution like basically all of the historically white universities that are called land grant institutions. But as you see, our mission is threefold: to infuse learning with American Indian culture, to prepare students for leadership, careers, and advanced studies in a multicultural world, and committing to research and promotion, perpetuation, and nurturance of American Indian language and scholarship. Okay, so if you want this mission statement, you can go to the college's website and get our mission statement and values and all that good stuff. So in some ways, the missions of the tribal college, the mission of the tribal college movement in general is inherently anti-racist in the sense that these institutions are generally chartered by the various tribes that they serve, and our primary function is to help build and rebuild indigenous communities. Specifically, College of Menominee Nation, primarily serves the Menominee people and also the Oneida people, since our Green Bay campus is right close to the Oneida Reservation. But we have people from many of the 12 Wisconsin tribes, as well as non-native students. So we in essence function, we are a tribal college, but we're also a community college. And so our mission, again, centers on indigenous peoples, but we serve all of the communities that are surrounding us, whether it's native or non-native. And particularly, I'm just going to talk briefly about my efforts to help indigenize our curriculum. That is, actually fulfilling our mission to perpetuate and nurture American Indian culture. So I'm just going to talk briefly about my redesign of our college English and research class, which when I joined College of Menominee Nation in 2010 was, basically your standard Phi Comp 2 class, research, argumentative essays, and that sort of thing. So for the first couple of years, I sort of, because I had gotten used to teaching that kind of course through my time as an English master's and PhD student, but realized around 2012 that this approach was not sufficient for a tribal college, and I was inspired by an article in the 2-year college composition journal, which of course I don't remember exactly, but it was a professor who changed his second part of the Phi Comp sequence to focus on American Indian readings and issues. And so I decided to do the same at my institution. And so over the academic year 2012-2013, I consulted with a number of our Indigenous faculty and staff, as well as a non-native faculty colleague, but who had been working with the Menominee tribe for years on various legal and cultural matters. So I consulted various subject matter experts to make sure that the course would serve the needs of our students. And of course, I talked it over with the other person who teaches the course, who is our singular Indigenous person in our department. She is a Lakudere Ojibwe. And again, making sure that sort of that the aims of the redesign were sufficient and culturally appropriate. And so in the fall of 2013, I launched the redesign, and we've been doing it ever since. And over the years, we have worked to make the course even sort of more responsive and more Indigenous centered. So for example, we started with a textbook with secondary sources of scholarship, many of which were written by natives, but many of which were not. And students didn't necessarily get into those as much. However, they did like the book Native American Testimony, which is a collection of first-hand accounts of basically spanning most of the history of Indigenous peoples in what is called the United States, and sort of combining the primary and secondary sources, and also doing film analyses of films that have native themes and such like that. And our students have responded well to this course because it is directly relevant to their experiences as students and as Native Americans. And also the non-native students get a more in-depth reading and insight into Native cultures. And just briefly, some of the topics that students have written about are the Haudenosaunee Thanksgiving address, which is an extremely important cultural element for the Six Nations. But there really isn't a whole lot of actual scholarship on that text. And so I try to encourage my students to, because I have a lot of Oneida students since I teach at the Green Bay campus, a lot of them really get a lot of insight into their own cultures, which they didn't really get. So a lot of them consult various, people working in the Oneida cultural institutions, and so they get to learn a lot about their own cultures, which that maybe their parents didn't know much about either because of cultural genocide. So, because I focus a lot of my work on popular culture and visual pedagogies, students, the purpose of the class really is for students to interrogate popular depictions of Indigenous peoples in media. So where do these stereotypes come from? Why are they so prevalent? So I show them silent films where these stereotypes started very early with really the invention of cinema. You have Native Americans being depicted in these very early Edison films. You have early Westerns. They also read dime novels, which a lot of the early cinema, took its inspiration from some of the Westerns. So the class is designed to be to be immersive for students and looking at how Indigenous peoples have taken the gaze back from essentially white culture, and sort of current work that various Native scholars, and filmmakers, and artists do. So it's not just a focus on the past and that, but it's designed to help students see the vitality and the resilience of Native cultures now. So that's my little blurb.
So I'm in a rather different position, which I think is one of the things that made this roundtable exciting for all of us, because we are a very large community college. If you count every student who comes through our door, we're about 60,000, and between 25 and 28,000 FTE. So it is definitely a beast with a lot of moving parts, and one that is occupying land from the Navajo, Paiute, Shoshone, and Ute peoples. So we obviously have a very rich history here of Indigenous peoples who are now having their land occupied by us. Sorry about that. And also we are a urban community college and a refugee relocation center. So we have a great many students who have come to us from their home countries, some with doctoral level education, which the United States will not acknowledge as being equivalent to our own, some who have only had fractured formal education in refugee camps. And we are open access and we accept everybody. So it is a very exciting place to work and teach, because we see such a wide range of people in our classes. But what we've really experienced here is all the moving parts of what being an anti-racist educator means and how we can reach out to other people across the college. Because I think a lot of us have experienced, let's say, the movement against linguistic imperialism in our own English classes, where it's like, hey, maybe grammar is not the end all be all of writing correctness. And then our colleagues in biology are like, why won't you teach them to write properly? And it's like, yeah, you mean commas. You don't actually mean writing skills. So I think we've all experienced that. We have a amazing writing center here at Salt Lake Community College, where we work to further anti-racist pedagogy in terms of, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with Clint Gardner. We are lucky to have him, and none of you are allowed to poach him away from us. I adore Clint. And so we have a tutoring class that we're lucky to have, where we can embed anti-racist pedagogy into this when we talk about things like identity and appropriation and what we look for and how do we address writings, particularly writings that are very personal for our students that they may bring into the writing center. Another piece of this is our writing across the curriculum community. Again, I think a lot of you are probably familiar with Tiff Rauskop, who is leading our writing across the curriculum, or writing across the college, excuse me, setting. And she has done a tremendous amount of work helping faculty to particularly not deal, that's entirely the wrong word, to be more aware of ways to facilitate students with different language backgrounds. And how do we facilitate their success instead of coming at this from a deficit mindset of, oh, I'm just looking for reasons to take points away from you. And that has been a real struggle for us because the kind of warm fuzzy blanket of objectivity that grammar gives us is hard to take away from faculty members who may not feel that they're otherwise qualified to comment on the writing aspect of what they see in their classes. We also have been working on anti-racist pedagogy within ourselves in the writing program. And full disclosure, my department is in mediation for some racist occurrences that have happened within us. So this has been a very personal journey for us as a department, not just pedagogically as something, oh, well, you know, we're all good woke people, so we don't have these problems, but confronting racist things that have happened in our department and to our colleagues. So how do we bring that into our classrooms, these very painful and healing experiences that we've been having, in a way that says we are not just people who are going to stand on a hill and teach out to you, but we are people who are currently undergoing, you know, these kinds of painful transitions. We also have worked a lot with our shared governance to talk about things like anti-racist pedagogy, what that looks like in a classroom. How do we embed that into our ideas of what it's going to look like in our college, not just in the classroom, but as a college. So, because this also affects how we treat particularly our new hires of color. So how do we create an environment where they feel safe and where they feel empowered to teach not only the students, but to teach us better ways of being? And as you can imagine, in a school our size, none of this is happening quickly. Go figure. So that's kind of what I am bringing to the table, is as many questions as there are answers, but it's certainly been a journey that's been an important one. And I think we're starting to see some fruit from it.
Okay, I am going to share my screen. Let me pull up my presentation here. All right, so yes. So that's my contact information. That is also a link to this presentation, which actually has a ton of links in it. So it's just TL for Turner Ledgerwood 21. The year that was supposed to be so much better than 2020, and then IWAC, of course. So that's the link to my presentation. Like I said, I put a lot of links in here. I just kind of continue to accumulate a bunch of stuff, in part because of the role that I serve at my institution. So just a little bit about me. I'm an English professor and I'm the writing program administrator at a small HBCU in Jefferson City, Missouri, so Lincoln University. So I'm over first year composition and over the WAC and WID program. So yes, I'm always busy and always exhausted. The majority of our students are Black or African American. Last year, we were at 75% of our enrollment was Black or African American. Over 80% was Pell Grant eligible in the fall of 2020. I myself am a multiply marginalized scholar, but I know I live in this very white looking privileged body. I am also a bonus mom to 3 boys, right now 8, 14, and 14 years old, and they are of mixed races and ethnicities. I consider myself an ally and an accomplice in my work and in what I try to do. So some of the anti-racist pedagogical practices for student success that I'm trying to get more and more of our teachers, not just in the English department where we teach the first year writing, but also in other departments where we're teaching writing across the curriculum or writing in the disciplines. So I think we should change our language for how we discuss standardized English. So kind of like what Anne was saying, you can't call it, right or correct, that we need to question and critique standard English and its relationship to power, this English that's been standardized, right? In particular, because we're at an HBCU, I think it's essential that we explain where Black language comes from and discuss the power relations there, that we discuss linguistic prejudice and the detrimental effects of code switching for our students and for people in our society, that we discuss who and what publications allow code meshing and who is allowed to participate in code meshing, that we read things in Black language, and that we give room, of course, in grading and judging of writing for our students to actually use their own English. Obviously, we've been saying this as a discipline since the 70s, but actively doing it seems to be a task that we're still working on. And then I think we have to actively confront the idea of failure in writing. So if it is those commas, is that really failure? And who gets to judge that? And that in that sense, we have to also discuss productive failure. So sometimes we do fail, and it's okay to fail. And then one of the things I do, and I link to these PowerPoints that I actually use in my classes for talking about grit and procrastination, because so many of our students at an open access university come in already expecting to fail, and they'll actually tell me they don't do their work and they don't come to class because they just assume they're going to fail anyway. And I also link out to a bunch of my examples from my own English 101 class where I talk quite a bit about standardized English and its relationship and where Black power comes from. So if you're interested in moving that into your classes, feel free to borrow and copy a lot of what I've done. So I think, and this is something I talk about with our faculty a lot, we need to change our language for discussing standardized English. So we tend to use these words for standardized English that you sound educated, you sound proper, you sound polite or correct or classy or dignified. And then we've got this moralizing language that leaves the implication that other Englishes are uneducated, improper, rude, bad, incorrect, somehow degraded or crude. Those are kind of the opposites. So we really have to rethink standardized English as actually white mainstream English and not actually something that we all should aspire to because it's so wonderful. I really love this quote. I use it with faculty and with my students to actually discuss and begin this discussion of talking about language and how we value language. So April Baker Bell wrote in her book, Linguistic Justice, if y'all actually believe that using standard English will dismantle white supremacy, then you are not paying attention. If we as teachers truly believe that code switching will dismantle white white supremacy, we have a problem. If we honestly believe that code switching will save Black people's lives, then we really ain't paying attention to what's happening in the world. Eric Garner was choked to death by a police officer while saying, "I cannot breathe." Wouldn't you consider "I cannot breathe" standard English? And then one of the things I do when I'm talking to other faculty is I ask, do you agree with this statement, and why or why not? And it always leads to a really great discussion of where people stand on the idea of standard English. And there's a whole lot of resistance, at least among my faculty, that we really have to teach standard English and fix, and they actually use the word fix, which is so problematic, fix these students so that they'll be more successful in their lives. So this quote, it just brings up a nice plethora of us talking about, okay, how are we talking about standardized English, and what messages are we sending to our students when we talk about it? So definitely talking about language, race, and power. Even with faculty and other disciplines, I've been getting some good traction by just having discussion groups where we're talking about this. So which languages are preferred in which contexts, and by whom, which groups are included or excluded by those decisions, and who benefits. And then in particular, we ask, why must Black Americans shift towards styles considered to be white in order to be, quote unquote, successful? This is from Aleem and Smitherman and their work. But this kind of questioning really gets interesting, as a lot of faculty across the disciplines are taking students to present at conferences, and they're talking about, but I need them to sound this way in order to be respected. And I'm like, wow, that is equating language very much when race with power. And so what's the consequences of that? We also read things in Black language. So these are a few that I use in some of my English classes. I use Should Writers Use They Own English by Vershawn Ashanti Young. I also use This Ain't Another Statement. This is a demand for Black linguistic justice, the latest thing that came out last year in July of 2020. That feels like it was just yesterday. And of course, I use portions of Linguistic Justice, Black Language, Literacy, Identity, and Pedagogy by April Baker Bell. I also have linked here a resources handout of other readings that I've used. And this is another bit.ly link. So it's just diverse hand. How some things are usually taken, but it's just a handout of just readings that relate to diversity that one might use in English classes or in other disciplines as well, as kind of supplemental reading. So, but ultimately, I think we have to rethink how we approach teaching standardized English and the language we use to discuss varieties of English. One of the ways to do that, I think, is give room in grading and judging of writing for students to use their own English. I know there's a bit of a debate about labor-based grading contracts. I used it for a while, and then I kind of changed it because of some of those debates which a lot of which have to do with neurodiversity. And just in the interest of full disclosure, I'm recovering from a traumatic brain injury myself. So I've suddenly realized that time is not necessarily the labor. And so I've kind of moved away from that as a time concept and more into a different kinds of work concept in my own classes. But also Peter Elbow's website and the Democratization of Writing still has great handouts and materials on contract grading and helping your writers. So don't forget that those are still out there. There was a really interesting essay in the book that just came out this spring it's edited by Jesse Borgman and Casey McArdle, Pars and Practice. PARS in practice, and there's a chapter in there that's about using labor-based grading in online writing, which I thought was really interesting. And then, of course, the recent book, Ungrading, Why Rating Students Undermines Learning and What to Do Instead. Of course, I'm still forced to give grades in my classes, so I've kind of tweaked the way I do labor-based grading in some interesting ways to try to make that fit better into the kind of time I have, and then also work well for our students. It wasn't too hard of a sell in first year writing to get people to bring in more Black language and reconsider how we discuss language and how we talk about our students. But there's a lot of resistance to opening that language and giving students the right to their own language. That's what I found in my experience in working with writing across the curriculum and writing in the disciplines. So I've had some success, though, with a faculty discussion group who read and discussed Should Writers Use Their Own English by Sean Ashanti Young. So we read that and had a nice discussion. And now I have some faculty members who are really questioning what they're doing in their classrooms and how they're preparing students to present at conferences, and really how much they should try to change their language to be more white. I've also brought in some anti-racist scholars who've done some WAC work, and that's been well received by a lot of people. Asao Inouye was nice enough to come and do a little workshop with some of my faculty, and that was great. I'm also trying right now a reading group where we're reading portions of Ungrading, Why Rating Student Undermines Learning and What to Do Instead. And then we're talking specifically about how that might impact how we look at writing overall. And let me get back. Okay, too far. So my kind of call to action is that we need instructors who are equipped to aid our students. So to confront the fear of failure that's built from years of linguistic oppression, to open their classrooms and assignments to linguistic variety, to embrace student resistance to educational environments, knowing that our students come from an educational environment where they have typically been linguistically oppressed, and to tackle the impact of systematic racist structures and policies in education. So some of the strategies that we've been working on in our university is building practices that challenge those existing structures of systemic linguistic racism in reading and writing. And that I know requires cultural change at institutional and professional levels. So like Anne talked about with her university really having to dive in and dig down to it, we've been trying to do some of that work too, and some really interesting things have come out. We're not at the point of needing mediation, but I could see very quickly how we might get there when we're all working together across disciplines and across the university. And then I have a further resources slide with just a link to our original proposal with a ton of citations for anybody who wants to read further. Let me stop sharing my screen there. And now we'll open it up to questions, discussions, comments, things that you've seen that have worked well. I know we're all still kind of working on this and learning, so I'm hoping we can learn from each other.
I'm going to quickly answer one question that came up in the chat about what we were actually doing in our classrooms here at SLIC. And the answer is right now threefold. We use threshold concepts from Wordle and Downs, where we are focusing on the major ideas about what writing is and how acquiring the skill of writing changes the way we look at the world. So instead of focusing on kind of micro outcomes like where'd your commas go, it's more we make choices about writing that influence the world around us. How does that look like to a student? The second thing that is not just a piece of racial and anti-racist pedagogy, but also of economic justice, is we use open educational resources. And what that means is, according to our students, what it means is free textbooks, which is kind of the shorthand version of it. We've been really lucky to have a supportive institution. We attach a $5 course fee per student to our open educational resource classes. And what that does is it allows us to pay primarily part-time faculty to produce texts for our open educational resource initiative, where we can do things like say, here's why we do citation the way we do according to Western academic standards. Here's the underpinnings of it. Here's a conversation about why why do people value certain kinds of English more highly than others? And is that right or not? So we can have these really dynamic, remixable texts that emphasize that. We also do assessment in our department, which pushes back against this idea of grammar is God, which I kind of like this new term I've come up with, and I will now shove it down the throats of all my faculty. But this idea of that being the thing that we look for in writing before as an end all be all. So by privileging other aspects of writing that are more important, we can advance that argument to the wider college. So yeah.
I noticed there was some interesting discussion about whether the Southern accent and Southern patterns of speaking have been marginalized, in fact, as a racist, in part as racism. And I believe absolutely that is the case. And my students usually get into talking about that. I have quite a few students from Mississippi, more and more from Arkansas and Tennessee, who are saying the same thing. They're like, we're represented in all popular culture and media as, being idiots for the way we speak. So I see we have a hand up. Do you want to?
Thank you. I really appreciate the resources here. We are at Chandler Gilbert Community College in Phoenix, near Phoenix. We are starting to develop our DEI strategies, both in classroom and across other programs that we have. And I'm an art historian, and I know that, I have heard this from students that it is the course, art history is a very wide sounding course. And, no matter how, I try to go OER so I can bring, other voices, but with English, I am always having this debate that where does English and art history begin, and how do we do this? And, I know that there is this in different fields that are writing heavy. There is this there is this apparent bias that, if, you cannot write English the way it's supposed to be written and or present in that language, well, you have no place here. If you go easy on grading, that is a big issue. I always allow revisions, of course, but I really appreciate the resources you guys shared. And my question is, what are your suggestions for different fields, language heavy courses that, they actually can help not oppressing further, at least our students who have been linguistically oppressed. I really love that phrase. I also wanted to ask from Eric if he can share their I know it might be on your website, the mission statement, but we are also in a process of developing our college and district-wide land acknowledgement. And I really appreciated how complete and comprehensive your statement was. Is this on your college website? Is this shared?
The mission statement?
Yes.
Yeah, the mission statement. Let me actually go to my college webpage, and I'll share that screen for everybody. I mean, of course, because we're a tribal college, and we're on the land that that belongs to the tribe. We don't have the same kind of issues with the performativity of land acknowledgements, because a lot of times that's what they are. They're just land acknowledgements or checking boxes. And if that institution doesn't actually actively work with any local indigenous peoples, then the land acknowledgements are just performative wokeness. But let me bring up my college's homepage here.
Thank you so much.
Sure. Assuming I can. I have so many tabs open on my thing here. All right. So that's our homepage. And so you can see our mission and vision and values by just going to about, and then that. So we also our faculty recently completely revised our general education outcomes to more to focus more on the mission and values, and also because we don't want to get dinged anymore by HLC than we already have been for for that. So we've been doing a lot of work in the past couple of years to really improve the college's engagement in culture and community. So there's that. And if anybody else is curious to see what we're doing, this is where it is. But I also want to sort of promote the tribal college movement as much as I can, because I don't know how many people are familiar with tribal colleges and universities. There are 32 of us or so around what's called the United States, and sort of it is a movement, and we do a lot of work for the communities that we serve. And I think more people need to know what we do.
Jeffrey, you had your hand up, and then I see you've written a few of your points in the chat as well.
I'm in the middle of a rainstorm now.
Oh no!
I may not be able to really ask. I posted a couple of questions. I may get disconnected, but I'll try. Really enjoyed the presentations. I love hearing from the diverse institutions that you guys are speaking from. It's a complex set of issues, and I've been reading Asal's book, and I've been thinking about assessment in particular, and I'm trying to figure out some theoretical issues, and I'd really be excited to hear some sort of conversation about this. We as teachers have the ability to change our classrooms, but making those changes in the classrooms doesn't necessarily change the system, and even those gentle conversations don't necessarily change the system. And so in the interim, we could be doing a disservice to our students in a realistic way. I know Sal would disagree with me, but I think it's others would agree with me, like Lisa Delpit would agree with me on this. And I think that the question is, how do we create anti-racist practices, which we really need? There's no question we are using racist assessments, but at the same time, doing so in a way that enables the emergent discourse to become a dominant discourse? That's a very complex, I think, question. I'll leave it there.
I have challenges with some of the things that Inoue and Ashanti Young say too, just from my positionality as a community college professor. Our students' ability to get a job is literally life and death for a lot of them. This is, so for me to tell them, I'm not going to teach you the language that you need to pretty up your resume and get this job is not reasonable for me. And I have a lot of the conceptual talks with my students about why this is problematic, why this is an act of linguistic oppression, and what they can do in their positionality as somebody who gets that job to move against it. But I have absolutely no problem when a student brings me a paper and says, I need to make this more white, to sit down with them, talk it through with them and fix it for them. Because especially my second language speakers, and I know that that's a very controversial thing to admit to, but if it helps my students to become more academically secure, then that's what I'm going to do, or more financially and economically secure, then that's, you know, our students are on the edge already.
And I agree with what Janelle and Jessica just weighed in on. It's not that we shouldn't teach standard varieties. It's just that those shouldn't be the only thing we teach, or somehow teaching them is superior. So I think watching how we talk about standardized language is important. And then also teaching about the history of how it's standardized. There was somebody who just had a hand up, but I don't know where the person went. If anybody wants to unmute and ask a question, feel free.
Sorry. Hi, I'm Carrie, teach at Humboldt State. I wanted to ask for us to have a kind of, I think, a little bit of a conversation about even how anti-racist education is framed, because I think that often it is framed in this way where there's a sense of this kind of like either or, like you have to teach either anti-racist approaches or you have to teach kind of like standardized language approaches. And so there's this sense of like, I'm either doing anti-oppressive work or I am actively doing oppressive work. And I find that in my own practice, I'm really skeptical of that kind of binary. And I'm also skeptical of the ability for us to do unfettered anti-racist, anti-oppressive work in capitalist institutions that many of which that are built on, you know, and profit from kind of like racialized capital and histories of colonialism. Anyway, all of this is to say is, I think that it's really useful to think about anti-racist approaches also as tools, right? Like, not just as kind of what Anne, when you were saying, talking about threshold concepts and how approaches to understanding writing function as a way for folks to navigate future writing situations, and not just a kind of like, I have complete control over students in the 16 weeks that we speak together, right? And that is going to fundamentally change the rest of their lives forever. Because of my interventions. Yeah, so I guess that's not a question, just an observation.
Well, I think just to go, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, you know, I guess in my situation is, you know, unique to this discussion, I think, because, you know, as a colonizer working at a tribal college who has their job because of racism and genocide, you know, I think some of it is, you know, just, you know, acknowledging our own, you know, if those of us who are white or white presenting, acknowledging our own positionality as a person in the classroom who has benefited from these systems, and, you know, sort of I guess I see my role as trying to be, as kind of subversive in the sense that, and I talk to my students about, well, especially in my business writing class about capitalism, there is no ethical consumption under capitalism, and just trying to do my best as an instructor to, even if I don't concentrate on subversive teaching or statements, is again acknowledging my positionality and working to in some ways undermine my own positionality. Not saying, well, I'm here as an anti-racist white person, self-declared ally, accomplice, which you can't be, I think, but more in, I'm here to help people who are, who have been marginalized and decentered, helping them access those kinds of resources so that they can do the work they need to help and build their communities. So I totally agree that it isn't a either or, but it's more of as an instructor, seeing where your own positionality is and working to, I guess, working to undermine it.
Well, and I would say giving students some voice and choice in the matter too. How far do they want to move away from their own language and dialect, and in which places do they want to? Because I know a lot of my students, they talk about, well, I want to be a Black business owner. If I'm going to be a Black business owner, I have to sound like a Black business owner to build up my business in certain locations. And I think they're absolutely right. And so it's a question of, when do you use which voice? And my students, they definitely talk about it as their white voice that they put on. And I'd like them to not feel like, at least in my classroom, that they have to put on a different voice to be able to speak. And I guess the same thing would be true in writing. There's no reason why they can't write things in a different variety of English. I keep calling it that. That's probably not the correct linguistic term. I'm not a linguist, but when I call it that, that's my students kind of understand, like, oh, okay, yeah.
And I talk to my students a lot about the fact that dialects or varieties of English are all rule governed. So just because you are speaking your home dialect or variety doesn't mean you can't be wrong. So we talk about, kind of this idea of presenting it to other people outside of our classroom as something that is formalized, as something that is rule governed, at least as far as a linguist would see it, and making the argument that it's not just lazy standard, which is already a problematic term, English, but rather something that other people are simply not familiar with. So it's the idea that, well, just because you learn Parisian French doesn't mean you understand Quebecois, and that can be a problem on the listener's end more than a speaker's end. So talking about things in that manner. And I talk to them, I'm from very rural Tennessee, and this is not the accent I grew up speaking, because this is my teaching, take me seriously, I promise I wore shoes before I was 16 accent. And I talk to my students about that and why I wouldn't use this accent when I go home, because I don't want the people I went to high school with to kick shit out of me. So this is kind of, something that we talk about, and how, we code switch in a variety of circumstances.
I know somebody else asked about what kind of resistance we see from other faculty, what that looks like, and how we deal with it. I know a lot of faculty just think I'm totally off my rocker. Like I'm just nuts. They're just, but like kind of like what Anne said in the chat, I do try to just have it as a conversation. Like, well, where do we fall? How do we how do we negotiate these two things of wanting them to write for that discipline that they're going into, which yes, could be very important. We write differently in sciences than we do in the humanities, you know. So I kind of go at it from that direction. But I'm interested to hear, and I do try to find stuff that is written with a little bit of code meshing to show them that it is possible to allow students to bring in their own language. But I'm curious, Anne and Eric, what kind of resistance you get from other faculty. And
well, the only resistance I got from my colleague in, you know, sort of redesigning things is, you know, I do give my students a little bit of some key theoretical terms at the beginning of the semester, like intersectionality, kyriarchy, heteropatriarchy, those sorts of things, just to introduce students to some of that discourse. But and she wasn't necessarily comfortable with some of the theory stuff, but you know, I didn't encounter really any resistance from the rest of the faculty. But you know, again, that might be my own situation where, you know, because there aren't that many of us, and you know, I got a lot of support from my faculty and administration, so I count myself lucky.
A lot of what we see from our faculty, being a community college that's had varying degrees of successful transfer agreements with the university that surround us, is this question of rigor. If we let students write in their own variety or their own dialect, then it's not rigorous, and they will fail when they get to a university. And what I talk to them about is being able to not, and this comes off maybe a bit problematically, but giving students the tools to explain why their dialect is valid, and they shouldn't have to, but giving them the tools to do it anyway, and talk about it from, say, a linguistics perspective, or from a, and I come back to that because part of my appointment here is I teach linguistics, and we're working on a transfer agreement with the University of Utah for a linguistics partnership. So that's kind of where my head is right now. But this idea of giving students the tools to advocate for themselves and their own English, and giving faculty the sense that they can advocate for those students too. Because when you actually sit down and talk with our resistant faculty at any rate, and we talk about, well, what do you value in, you know, writing in your class, they don't mean commas. What they mean is, I get distracted when I see a comma in the wrong place because somebody, you know, beat it into me that that's not where a comma goes. I get that. But how do you use that as a way of enhancing your close reading of a text rather than a tool of penalty? So how do you undo that instinct to punish non-conformity, to read past it and say, okay, this is me paying close attention to the text. What was the student writer telling me in this paragraph, rather than they had 3 spelling errors?